I'm glad I waited. I'm glad you waited. I know what you want. I know what you want to hear. You want to hear me talk about James Harden being traded after another trade request and getting his way. He's on the Clippers. He's no longer the Sixers' problem. But despite what you may think, and some of you are listening because you like me and you're like, oh, Russillo's going to talk about Harden again. And some of you may hate me. You're like, I want to hear what that dick is going to say about Harden. I know he's fat. It wasn't the cashmere. But this is a hard topic for me because, believe it or not, I get emotional about Harden because I think we have some similarities. We both love basketball. I would say I had more of a sneaker passion when I was super bored in Connecticut. I was like, I just ordered these. My mortgage is pretty low. He likes sneakers. Both not married. Both not afraid. Maybe in a night out with the boys, the rare time it happens with me. I think he probably goes out a little bit more than I do. And somebody's like, do we make one more stop? Do we add a destination? Destination America? Like, it's America, right? We can stop. We can stop, make one more stop, right? I don't have anybody to go home to yell at me coming in late. And you may forget this. This was my coach. This guy was my coach in Houston. I went to him and said, hey, I got to go back in the game. We want to talk players only. And sometimes I wonder if that's why Harden is the way he is. He was so players friendly to me, players first. You know, as players coach, I went right up to him and said, I got to go back in. He didn't even say anything. So I just checked myself in. He didn't object to it. He just let me do it. I think he was looking at people in the crowd anyway. So yeah, it's hard for me. As far as what this means, there's a win here for Philadelphia because it's over. I'm a little surprised that Daryl didn't add anything. Daryl Morey, the GM of the Sixers. Yeah, and that's another thing that we have in common. Harden and I both don't like Daryl Morey. So that would just add it to the list. But knowing the scouting report on Morey, usually I think he would wait until he feels like he can't wait any longer. And maybe other people in Philadelphia, maybe Embiid was like, let's turn the page on this thing. Maybe it was ownership. Who knows? But they didn't add one piece that actually really helps their rotation now. Now, we can get an argument about Covington and Batum and that they potential rotational players, but there wasn't anything that he actually got. We were like, ooh, that's a nice little piece. And that's because nobody wanted Harden. There really wasn't much of a market for him. The fact that he's traded for 4 expiring contracts, again, I don't want to debate like the plus minus VORP and all the value of some of these bit pieces that the Clippers sent over as salary filler to make this deal happen. But they get the worst, Philadelphia does, of a 2026 first. That's the worst of either Oklahoma City, the Clippers, or a Houston protected pick. Oklahoma City actually got back into this deal by maybe removing a first for a potential swap, the upside of a swap later on. You could talk about the Thunder and say, well, the way they're built, they're probably not going to be getting a better swap. Who knows? A 2028 unprotected first, a second rounder in 24 that could be one of 4 team second rounder, a 29 second rounder, then a 29 first pick swap. So maybe it's 1 first, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, the second rounders, whatever, who knows. But there's nothing that's in that you go, wait, Philadelphia, in theory, a title contender, even though I think we'd all agree there feels like there's a significant gap between Milwaukee, Boston, and then Philly maybe being in that third spot. But if you're worried about Embiid, it's like, okay, well, you moved out somebody who's a marginal all-star in Harden, and there's nothing coming back this year that feels like it's a solution to where some of those minutes and shots and playmaking are going to go, although Maxi's been incredible. So you see kind of the initial point. But on the other side of this, like, I almost feel like the Clippers did him a favor, because where else was Harden going? Who else was trading for Harden knowing that he didn't want to be there and that this is a dude who does not care? This is the 4th trade request of his career. The first one, totally side with Harden. Oklahoma City screwed it up. They traded him a year before they needed to. They didn't really get a lot back. They were cheap about it. They should have understood And I know the ownership dynamic there was super complicated for a bunch of different reasons, but it's a team that should have done a better job understanding the influx of revenue with the new TV deal and realizing that like another $15 million for the total contract of Harden at that time is not going to be the most egregious thing ever. And they banked on Westbrook, Durant, and Ibaka. In today's version of basketball, Ibaka would have been the guy that was out. So that trade request made a ton of sense to me. The one with Houston, it was gross. It was ridiculous. The one with the Nets was even more screwed up, even if I could kind of side with Harden a little bit because he just wasn't into the whole Kyrie thing. And then the Philly one, I've allowed myself an open mind to some path of sympathy because I still think there's some pieces that we don't really know what was understood or what was said and why he took the discount last year, although he wanted credit for taking that discount, where he basically at one point was like, I don't think I'm getting enough credit for this discount that I'm taking. It's like, okay, but then you opted in when you wanted to be out of there anyway. So the collective of it, I have no sympathy, but the individual times, I'd be like, okay, I can kind of see what he's going with there. But the thing that's always bothered me, which is I think bleeds into who he is as a playoff player, is that if you're okay, when you're one of the best in the world at what you do, but you're okay putting on that on display in a much lesser version and playing bad on purpose to get your way, then I'm just never going to fuck with you. You know, you're just not a foxhole guy. And I wonder if that's part of the wiring for him, where some of those big playoff moments you're like, oh, he's not into this today, despite the fact that his talent allows him to have these high ceiling games that are absurd. He had 2 amazing games against the Celtics, but at the start of game 7, I was like, oh, okay, he's not into this. And that's really scary. I'll never understand. I'd never understand. You're so good at this. You're capable of doing these things, but then you just decide that you don't want to do them. So he gets his way again. The basketball part of this, because like I said, it's, you know, to grade the trade out and be like, oh, that was great. They got these picks. Well, not really, but it's also great they got these picks because I don't know where else he was going to go. The Clippers part of it, if you look at some of the Clippers stuff here from the last couple years, the Clippers offense last year was 17th in passes per game. They were 22nd in offensive movement through the NBA tracking stuff. Kawhi is, although not reliable, still incredible with the ball in his hands. Paul George is a guy that needs the ball in his hands. When Paul George was still with the Pacers and he was being offered to basically every team that had another guy that the Pacers were trying to get back, and that trade didn't happen with a bunch of the other teams because teams were like, well, look, even if Paul George is better than the player that the Pacers are asking for, I have to worry about the Paul George long-term part of this. There are other teams that were like, if we get Paul George, it will change who we are offensively, even if we'd agree that Paul George is better than the player that the Pacers are asking for. So now you're taking Harden, who went to a playmaking role with Philadelphia, where apparently he didn't really like it as much as he played along. I mean, rumblings that he'd like to get back to Houston Harden. Wouldn't we all love to get back to who we were 5 to 7 years ago? But Harden is somebody that is going to have the ball in his hands the entire time. So now what does that mean for the Clippers when you're going to be taking the ball away from Kawhi and Paul George in bigger moments? There's also another number here that I think is important, that George and Kawhi combined had the ball on 51% of the possessions in games that they played last year. If you go back to last year, Harden was number 2 in the NBA of actual full time of possession. The time he actually had the ball in his hands was just over 8 minutes. It was number 2 behind only Luka Doncic, which is his own topic. So you put it all together and you're like, okay, so who is Harden going to be? Is he going to be dribbling the air out of the ball, waiting until the very end to make the shot pass decision? And look, he's a terrific passer. I've always said that about him. But there's also a gimmicky element to it where he's going to wait it out and wait out the possession, waiting for the opportunity to get that assist. So that means a lot of people are going to be watching. At least he was passing it to Embiid. In Houston, it just meant you were going to watch until he decided to either drive, get the call, give the lob to Clint, say, or the step back 3 that he was hitting at a higher rate back then. So the basketball part of it, I don't quite understand because it's a lot of overlap. Now, here's what I do understand. This is a rule we should all remind ourselves in the NBA every time a deal like this is done. Front offices, ownership can never help themselves from turning down a transaction that raises their baseline talent level. Okay? Whenever I first started talking to guys about like, hey, how do you build a team? Like, how do you do this? You know, going to these camps 20 years ago, like just really fascinated that there was this world that exists that I didn't understand. I wanted to see what you guys saw. And the constant was, hey, it's talent. It's about talent. It's about talent. Things break down. Is this person talented enough to figure it out, right? This isn't new. You already understand this, but I'm just repeating it again. But I also think it's part of the reason why the Clippers go, okay, maybe it doesn't fit. We know Harden's situation, but considering Paul George and Kawhi missed so many games, maybe this helps them throughout the regular season. Maybe there's a version where, what if they're all healthy? What if they're all healthy in the playoffs? Okay, what if they are all healthy in the playoffs? What is Harden like off the ball? Because you don't want to take that mid-drive jumper pull-up away from Kawhi. Is Paul George going to be stuck in the corner? And then what's it going to be like when Harden, is he going to be motivated as a free agent, or is he going to be upset that his extension isn't already done? So I think that's probably what the Clippers felt. Like, hey, we're just better. We're better today than we were yesterday, and that's the job, even if these guys are going to have to figure it out, because I do think they're all smart basketball players. Now, as far as the Kawhi part of it, like, I still remember the 2 games against Phoenix. I think you probably do too. You're like, man, does he have it again? Are the Clippers going to beat this Suns team that just got Durant? The problem is those 2 games, by the time next year's playoff starts, those will be the only 2 playoff games that Kawhi's played in 2 years. I think Paul George finally turned a corner with some of his playoff stuff, which was real and disappointing. In 21 with the series against Dallas, especially against Utah, with them taking out the Jazz. Phoenix series was pretty good. I know Game 6 wasn't very good, but those are the last playoff games that Paul George played in back in 21. And then you have the Westbrook part of it, which is even sillier to forget and be like, wait, didn't you guys already break up and now you're back together? It's going to suck for Westbrook unless he goes all second unit. And look, he's played pretty well here. I thought the last second shot attempt thing was totally unfair against Westbrook, and that's coming from somebody like me that doesn't really like it. So to put it together again, I know that I almost sometimes feel like I have personal resentment for how we felt about the Westbrook year of the MVP and the triple-double and the Harden numbers that were off the charts, and Daryl Morey actually sitting down in front of people and saying out loud that Harden's a better offensive player than Jordan because of what the numbers are telling us. And what I think I like that we've gotten to that point is that we've learned that a lot of those big numbers were really more misleading numbers. You still had to be Hall of Fame talent level to even pull off what some of these players have done. And look, there's players that aren't even close to being in the Harden class that'll put up some big numbers in a season. I'm like, does that really mean anything? But in this case for Harden, it meant something because he wins an MVP. I think he was top 5 like 3 or 4 other times. You felt like Houston was the only team really going for Golden State, actually taking a chance at the team that seemed impossible to beat. So I admire them and give them credit for that part of it. But I know people think that it's something else. And it's just, hey, man, it's pretty simple for me. The league should have less of this. I don't want more of this. And I don't know how anybody could see Harden get his way a 3rd time in a very short amount of time and be like, that's a guy I want to root for, despite our similarities.